Welcome in, everybody, to the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast. I am your co-host, Billy Muzio. With me, as always, Jody Smith. And tonight, we're going to be running through our wide receiver and our tight end rankings here for 2022. We have been working just tirelessly on the back end, inputting them into the site, our spreadsheets, going through our ranking summits. We did another one today, Jody. And it's always very interesting and comforting knowing that when you go through and you do all these numbers and you work all the math out for every team, that we sit here and compare them to each other, and we're pretty close on a lot of these guys. Like, and we compare our numbers, and it's like I have him for 868 yards, and Jody's like I have him for 880 yards, and 6 scores or 6.5 scores. So it's comforting knowing that a lot of our numbers are similar. But tonight we're going to focus on the differences and kind of highlight some of the top 10, but primarily our major differences are going to be in the wide receiver 30 through wide receiver 45 range. So what do you say? We just hop into it tonight?
Yeah, but what you were saying, just a second ago is, it's amazing that you and I, we have not contrasting, but we have different, approaches on the back end of it, like, but the way we broke things down. But, it's hard to explain unless you're, doing this for a living, but actually how many hours of labor goes into compiling all these projections, all these targets for every team, for all these, hundreds and hundreds of players. And on my end, doing the defensive side of the ball too, it's a labor of love. But what's remarkable, kind of what you said, was that despite the fact that we both did that independent of one another, we bounced some ideas off each other. But I thought, listen, you were number one last year, so whatever process you had, clearly you want to use that again. So I want to stay out of your way. You get that done. And I had already done my end, and on the net result, we got together. Lo and behold, they were pretty close. But just like you said, that can be reassuring. Especially for both of us to have had the success we did, in draft rankings last year, to have the net result from this summer's labor of love is that we were pretty close on many players. So. It's reassuring.
It is reassuring. We did have a couple differences inside of our top 5. I just want to kind of run through those. We both have Justin Jefferson as our wide receiver number 1. Then that's where the differences start to happen. You have Cooper Kupp as your number 2. I have Stephon Diggs as my number 2. What's your take on Diggs? You have him at 4, so it's nothing egregious here. We just have a flop of 2, 3, and 4. No. But walk me through your thought process. Why do you have Diggs at 4? I mean, I know why I have Diggs at 2, but I'm curious why you have him at 4.
Well, the general consensus is that you have that tier of 3, but we've said several times that if you look at it, Diggs is really close to Jamar Chase in that sense. If you were to average out the red zone success rate that Diggs didn't have last year, when you look at his red zone targets, you could expect that, Diggs should be contending in that offense. He could easily be one of the guys on the short list to lead all wideouts in touchdowns. So, I don't have a problem with anyone ranking him up as far as 2. But for me, I just love, what Kupp did and what Chase did last year. I don't see them regressing all that much. So, we were in agreement the whole time with Jefferson, and that's not alone. We're actually starting to see around the industry a lot of people coming forward with Jefferson over Kupp. It kind of reeks maybe a little bit of being too cute, but I believe it was on Twitter. You replied to someone, or it may have been in our Discord channel, but there was a question that basically was like, Jefferson number 1 ? And your simple and elegant reply was, he's the best receiver in football. Yeah. And, when you look at things simplistically, so it's easy to justify him being number 1. Your point with Diggs, I'm sure you've got some good ones of why he's your number 2. For me, it just becomes, I just feel a little more comfortable with Kupp and Chase. And he's closer on those tiers than maybe a lot of people have, but I can't get him above either one of those. I'm curious of how you did.
Yeah, I absolutely love Stephon Diggs this year, and it breaks down to, plain and simple, is that he's tied to the best offense in football with probably the most electric quarterback right now in football, and we saw what they've been able to do together these last years, and I think that they're going to continue that success here in 2022. When you look at his metrics, he's always in the top 7 in routes ran. He's looking at last year top 5 in targets, top 8 in target share, number 2 in air yards, which is indicative of success in fantasy football. But the thing that kind of stands out to me that most people don't think of Diggs as is a red zone target. He was number 2 in the league in red zone targets last year with 34 actually. That's a lot of red zone targets, especially for a receiver that most people don't look at as an alpha, right? Or look at him and say he's this big-bodied receiver that's going to just box you out in the end zone. They don't think of Stephon Diggs that way, and he's not that way. But to get 34 red zone targets is also just another reason why I really like him, especially in this Bills offense that's going to see a lot of red zone looks. And then you look at other metrics. Of course, he's top 10 in almost everything across the board. But all of us know that he is a magnificent route runner. And where he won was in his routes last year. So versus man, he won 333 routes versus man. He actually won the second most routes in the NFL last year. I think that continues here in 2022. Again, tied to the best offense in football, with arguably the best quarterback in football. And I think that it's kind of hard. It was hard for me not to put him at 2. Cooper Kupp had an amazing season. He really did. It was godly, and it was arguably one of the best of all time. But you look at his consistency, or should I say inconsistencies. He's had, top 20 finishes, top 10 finishes. He's had some outside. So he's kind of done a little bit of a yo-yo in terms of fantasy production. Yes, he was tied to a different quarterback before, but you look at the strength of schedule that they have in 2022, and it's the toughest strength of schedule in the NFL. You add in Allen Robinson, and I just look at it and say it's going to be very hard for him to repeat that production in 2022, especially as defenses adjust and their schedule gets tougher. So don't get me wrong. I like Kupp. He's my wide receiver 3, but I think it's going to be very hard for him to repeat that production here in 2022. Quite frankly, it's not realistic, or I should say it should be realistic to think that he may be a top 5 or 6 receiver, and people aren't going to like hearing that, but think about the production that he had last year and think about how hard that is going to be to repeat. And when you add in, like I said, that strength of schedule, where is he going to start kind of regressing to? And I think somewhere between 3 and 5 is probably realistic, but it would not surprise me come the end of the year if he's wide receiver 6, 7, 8, if not later, quite frankly. Looking at our other rankings. So Kupp 3-2, Jamar Chase I have at 5, you have at 3, nothing egregious there. But the one I wanted to talk about was Tyreek Hill. So again, nothing egregious. I'm at 7, you're at 10. We're all very close here, but 3 spots in the top 10 is something worth discussing. Why are you lower on Tyreek Hill?
It just comes down to my lack of confidence in Tua Tagovailoa. We're not going to say his name on the podcast. Tagovailoa. I don't know what to think of that offense. That's why I'm lower on. I mean, both of us are in agreement with Jalen Waddle. Big time, we're way lower than the consensus on Jalen Waddle, but I really don't know what to make of that offense. I don't think Jalen Waddle is going to fall off, the map or anything, but I don't think Tua has the ability to sustain 2 weekly wide receiver 2s, and he's got that deep ball arm, and we've all talked about it. And by all accounts, things have actually looked rather promising out of Miami. But he's just a guy that the step down from Patrick Mahomes to Tua, and the intricacies and the timing and the cohesiveness that he had with Patrick Mahomes for those years that he was in Kansas City, you can't replicate that in one summer. And again. I don't have a lot of confidence in offense. I like, both of us. We love Chase Edmonds for different reasons, but like you said, it's not egregious. If you have him as your wide receiver 7, I understand. Maybe it would be different in a best ball format, but for now, to me, it's actually surprising that he's still in my top 10, because it feels like, when all is said and done in a couple of weeks, he may not even be in my top 10 anymore. And it's just simply because I wouldn't want to risk that much offense. I like plenty of the other guys that are in that range, and I would just I would rather focus on guys that I feel like are in safer, more static situations. He's just a fade for me. I don't have him anywhere yet, and that's simply because he hasn't fallen deep enough for me to invest in him. But I don't know. You're not as concerned as I am, are you?
No, I still think I get the Tua concerns, I really do, and I get the fact that he's not going to be able to sustain two top 20 receivers, and I think that's why you and I both have Jalen Waddle outside of our top 20. Actually, in fact, I have him at 26 and you have him at 27, and this was without us even looking at each other's homework, and we turned it into each other and like, oh crap, we're both that low on him, and we look at it, and I think it begs for some explaining here because people are very high on Jalen Waddle this year. And don't get me wrong, he had a fantastic rookie year, 1,000 yards, 104 receptions. He had 6 receiving touchdowns. But, if you read my fade list over at Full-Time Fantasy, I'll kind of give you a little sneak peek here if you haven't read it, is things have changed. I mean, they signed or they went out and traded for Tyreek Hill. They signed Chase Edmonds. And both of these routes are where Waddle excelled at. I mean, you look at Tyreek ran, the 19th most slot snaps last year, and Jalen Waddle ran the 15th most slot reps last year. Where else does Jalen Waddle do most of his damage? Behind the line of scrimmage or out in the flats? And where else does Chase Edmonds do that damage? In those same areas. So I feel like that's why you and I are both low. We both had the same kind of thought process on Waddle. But I think that Tyreek is going to be kind of the beneficiary of Tua actually maybe throwing the ball deep, also them just getting creative in space with Tyreek. You look at McDaniels and how he utilized Deebo Samuel last year. I think it could be safe to say that we're going to see a very similar role here for Tyreek in the way that he got Deebo Samuel into open space and relied on the yards after the catch. So I look at Tyreek as kind of that same role in this offense as Deebo did inside the McDaniels offense, and say if he can continue his, electric ability, that he's going to be able to kind of hit a home run with it. So again, we're not very far off, 7 and 10.
And one more thing on that is we forgot to mention the Full-Time Fantasy Tools strength of schedule. Dolphins 32nd, the worst strength of schedule for wide receivers in football using those tools.
It is very tough. Also, I think it's 32nd in the shootout too. So it's not helping my case here. We have a question here. Is CeeDee number 4 for you? Yes, CeeDee Lamb is number 4 for me. Behind,
I believe I have him at 5. Let's check. I have Diggs as my 4. So, Diggs, Lamb is actually my 6.
Yep. So both close. I think that the target share here, I think, and the talent is unquestioned, and I think it's just a matter of how this offense is going to react with the loss of Cooper. So it's to be determined, but we both are very high on CeeDee Lamb and expect, I think I have like 150 plus targets for him. I think 160 as well from the realm of possibilities. The next one I feel like that needs explaining is T. Higgins. So T. Higgins in my rankings come in at wide receiver number 19, significantly lower than consensus. You're a little closer than consensus at wide receiver 13. So I feel like I should be explaining myself on this one. Again, back on my fade list, T. Higgins hits the fade list for me. A lot of those concerns come from Joe Burrow in the offense, and Joe Burrow was extremely efficient last year and especially very productive down the stretch. Like top 8, 7 in almost every single metric, number 1 in completion percentage, and top 5, 6, 7, 8 in almost every other metric. And you look at regression here again in 2022. Again, strength of schedule comes into play at the second toughest, or the third toughest, strength of schedule in the NFL. And then you look at Higgins and what he did from his efficiency standpoint. He finished as wide receiver 22 or worse in fantasy points per game in 10 of his 14 starts during the regular season. In those 14 games, he had 4 or fewer receptions. In 5 games and 62 yards or less in 8 of 14. He was wide receiver 71 in contested catch rate, 25%. Wide receiver 77 in true catch rate at 78.7%. And then wide receiver number 31 in target separation. Wide receiver 40 in route wins. Wide receiver 52 versus man. Wide receiver 36 in routes ran. And like I said, don't get me wrong, I think T. Higgins is a great receiver. I think he's probably a little bit better in best ball than he is in redraft, and I'm definitely on an island here compared to consensus, but I just don't think he's going to be, a top 15 receiver this year. And maybe I'm wrong, and they continue the passing volume they did down the stretch and into the Super Bowl, but I think it's going to be very hard for Joe Burrow to replicate that success.
And on my end with Higgins, you're set, like you said, I'm closer to consensus. And what I looked at was the next 6 guys before my wide receiver 20. And I can probably justify and probably will move Allen Robinson, who currently is my 14. I'll probably end up moving him because everyone knows of Allen Robinson. But the 5 guys down my PPR rankings are DJ Moore, Diontae Johnson, Terry McLaurin, Brandon Cooks, Darnell Mooney. All great PPR options, but lacking touchdowns. That's an area I feel like T. Higgins has more upside, more potential in. The touchdowns are probably pretty similar last year. I want to say they were, all around that 6 range or fewer in some cases for those guys. But to me, it feels like there's a potential there for Higgins to kind of, approach 8 to maybe double-digit touchdowns, and that's what gives him the slight edge for me. You made up great points, and to me, with those guys, you could interchange most of those names in fantasy drafts and whatnot. Maybe even try to get shares of different ones of them, and nothing sounds egregious to me at all.
Yeah, the next receiver on our list worth noting is Diontae Johnson. He, for me, comes in as wide receiver 24. For you, wide receiver 16. So 8 spot differences here in the top 3 rounds is worth noting as well. And for me, it just breaks down to the offense. I just don't fully trust the quarterback situation and this, the offensive line and the volume that he relied upon last year. They were throwing the ball a lot with Big Ben, and it was just Big Ben's number 1 target. So will he probably be the number 1 target in this offense? Absolutely, but I just don't think they're going to have the amount of volume that they had last year. I mean, you look at, he was the number 1 receiver in routes run, the 594. He was number 2 receiver in targets, the 169. Number 4 in target share, 28.5%. 91% snap share. Like these are godly numbers for a receiver, and to be able to see that repeat again in 2022 with Trubisky under helm, or whether it's Rudolph or Pickett, whoever it's going to be at any given week, I just don't think they're going to have that amount of success or even that game pace that they even had last year. And as bad as Ben was at the tail end of his career, it's definitely worth arguing that maybe he was still better than any one of these quarterbacks that are going to come in 2022. What's your thought on Diontae Johnson?
It's a sheer consistent volume play for me. Your points are valid. Like right now, we may determine this weekend who's going to be the quarterback for Pittsburgh. And, by all accounts, Kenny Pickett has kind of stepped up his game and has a real opportunity to come in there and steal that job from Trubisky. So that may actually be better. But with Diontae, it's just that consistency. They re-signed him, which was one kind of interesting thing that the Steelers generally haven't done, which is extend their wide receivers. They generally have let them walk. So for them to have re-signed him, that tells me he's going to be a big part of what they do. But just look at last year. He double-digit targets in 13 out of their 19 games. Their 18 games if you include the playoffs, and he only had fewer than 6 targets, I want to say, one time the whole season. So to me, it's just a volume play. I think some sort of regression due to the quarterback situation is probably warranted, but that kind of just continued role that he's had his whole time in Pittsburgh, I feel pretty comfortable with. But again, as we just hit on with T. Higgins, these guys, to me, this second to third tier of wide receivers, they're all really interchangeable. So you could move a guy up to 13 or 14, or you could drop him down into the lower 20s, and it's not a lot of difference. And it's just it's guys that are falling around the same range in most drafts.
So it's interesting. A guy that I want to talk about that we're not different on, we're actually neck and neck on, but we are very different than consensus, is Allen Robinson. So Allen Robinson comes in as my 12th receiver, your 14th. So we both have him inside of our top 15, top 14 to be exact. Consensus here is going to be wide receiver number 21. So we're a good 7, almost 10 spots ahead of him in my rankings. I know why I like Allen Robinson. I'll explain that in a minute. But why do you like Allen Robinson more than consensus?
So you remember the glory days of earlier this spring when we were getting Allen Robinson in the 40s and 50s and whatnot? Yes. He was way down there. Look, it's just a simple issue of we saw what Matthew Stafford, a legitimate all-star, future Hall of Fame quarterback, could do for Cooper Kupp last year. And you look at the dregs that Allen Robinson has had tossing him the ball throughout his whole career, but yet he still, from a volume play, has been a very dependable, almost locked in wide receiver too throughout his whole career, even in garbage situations. So I'm excited really to see what kind of connection that him and Matthew Stafford can play. And I know you mentioned that their schedule stuff, but you're removing the volume of Robert Woods, you're removing the volume of Odell Beckham. At this point, those targets have got to go somewhere. And I think we all can agree, Cooper Kupp, what he did last year isn't sustainable. And now you bring in this legitimate alpha to help relieve some of the pressures and some of the looks and some of the targets. And personally, I think Allen Robinson, clearly by looking at our numbers, we clearly think he's primed to probably have the best season of his career. And it won't surprise me at all to see him approach double-digit touchdowns. And wouldn't that be a nice change for a guy that has been just held down and limited throughout his whole career?
Yeah, limited is the key word. I felt like his entire career has been hindered due to the quarterback play that he has. I could sit here and I think it'd be tough to name all the shitty quarterbacks that he has had in his career.
That would actually be. Somebody should get that Tim Couch jersey that you see that somebody's taped all the names on the Browns. Yeah. Somebody should get a Robinson jersey and do that with the crap that he's had throwing in the ball.
And even with all the crap he's had, he has not had, outside of the injured years, which is 2017 and last year 2021. Outside those years, he's never finished outside wide receiver 37 or worse than fantasy points per game. 2015, he was wide receiver number 8. 2019, number 9. 2020, number 13. And again, we just had random quarterbacks throwing him the ball. Again, so you already touched base on this.
We've seen that he has every ability to do exactly what you just said, which finished 8th, 9th, and 13th, and that was with,
probably
those guys throwing him the ball. So
yeah, just a bunch of BS throwing him the ball. So Stafford elevates his game. I think that he cares about football. I just don't think he cared last year. Also, you look at the comments that you heard of him saying that Matt Nagy had lost the locker room, and anytime you see an alpha player speak out against their coach, it's usually a mindset in the game, right? And that's the human element that we talk about. And when someone loses interest in the game or a love or a passion for the game, you can see it in their production as well. So I think that he has finds that love again in football and with Matt Stafford and with McVay and this Rams offense. And I think that I agree with you. I think that you were looking at potentially his best season of his career. The next ones, let's go down the list here and see. I think let's move on to the 30s, because most of ours in the 20 were all within 1 or 2 spots of each other. We're both higher on Darnell Mooney than consensus. You have him at 19, I'm at 21. That's a pure volume play. I think we both have him projected for about 150 targets. Let's move on to, where was the player? Tyler Lockett. So Tyler Lockett, I'm at wide receiver 40. You're at wide receiver 32. We all know what Tyler Lockett is capable of doing. We have seen his fantasy production while with Russell Wilson. My concern is the quarterback. What makes him? We're only 8 spot difference here, but 8 in the top 40 is still significant. What's your confidence in this quarterback situation? Who do you think wins the job, and what does it mean for Tyler Lockett?
Well, that's the big caveat for me. Is this whole offseason has been assuming that Geno Smith wins that job. And I know it sounds crazy to think that Geno Smith is an upgrade over who else you might have as a potential starting quarterback. But to me, his history, his experience in this offense, he's always, to me, been the slight favorite. And I'm kind of really eagerly anticipating that. If Drew Lock is actually named their starter, I'll probably have to readdress both the receivers for the Seahawks moving down. But with Lockett, again, it comes down to a consistent volume play. I looked at last year, and this is kind of interesting because in the 4 starts that Geno Smith played, he also played the fourth quarter of week 5 when Russell Wilson went down. And in that fourth quarter, he threw 3 targets to Tyler Lockett. So you could extrapolate that and say, that was a pace of 12 targets per game. And then Lockett had 2 just terrible games, and then he went nuclear. I want to say it was week 8 before their bye. He caught like 12 out of 14 targets for over 100 yards. He went bonkers. Now, if you divide that out, he basically averaged about 8 targets a game. So he, multiply that by 17 weeks, and you get a guy with 130-ish targets in a year. Sounds great, right? I'll sign up for that. But again, the two things is it was one huge blowout game, and then 3 targets in the fourth quarter, and then 2 disappointing games. So Lockett may be more, in that offense, I guess, if Geno Smith is their guy, maybe he's more of a best ball play. But to me, I'm just looking at you're going to have a lot of fantasy-friendly game scripts there in Seattle. I want to say the Seahawks have the second or third lowest over-under for wins for the season. So you're talking about a team that's probably going to be trailing often. In all honesty, whoever starts from the quarterback won't necessarily make 16, 17 starts. Both guys will be playing, but it's a volume play. It's Lockett's consistent area of absorbing all those targets, of the ability to get open, and DK Metcalf clearing things out above the field is going to open things up underneath. And, hey, if Seattle's down 31-14 in the fourth quarter and that's all they can do is sneak and dunk down the field, hey, those points count too.
Okay, we have a public announcement here from Mr. Grapefruit. The grilled cheese burrito is back at Taco Bell, and
is this a sponsored part? You get a Taco Bell sponsorship I didn't know about?
Not sponsored, but we will do it. Take a sponsorship, Taco Bell. If you're listening, we will gladly sponsor. We can just eat grilled cheese burritos here on the show. But Mr. Grapefruit gives it a 5 out of 5 seal of approval. So just wanted to make sure that was noted. We do have a question here from, I think it's Giselle Jones. I'll make sure I pronounce that right. I've been feeling compelled to take Godwin at 503 after CMC, Javonte Pittman, A-Rob start. I know he's not high on your rankings, but his upside is so enticing in that offense. What's your take? Let's just jump right into Godwin, because he is lower on both of our rankings. What do you feel about here at 503? I'm out at 503. Are you in on buying Godwin at 503?
That may be a bit early. Man, don't get me wrong. Billy, earlier this offseason, when I wasn't taking into account the injury as much as I probably should have, I had Godwin in a top 20. I was grabbing him everywhere I possibly could, even in the fantasy index, either the draft or the auction. I'm not sure which one, but I was walking away thinking, it was the auction, because I was like walking away like, hey, I got him for a good deal. But it's been really, really positive news on his recovery and the fact that he's been running routes and he's been in camp, and by all accounts, he may be cleared to actually start in week 1. That's all like really positive. However, it doesn't mean he's going to be active. It doesn't mean that he's going to be a huge part of the offense. He could be in a decoy type role. It's something to approach, I think, with caution. 503 feels right now like a little early, but it depends on your strategy. If you're a swing for the fences type of person, or if you're willing to say, hey, like for us that are willing to take those 6 zeros for DeAndre Hopkins, if you're like, listen, I'm going to keep my team in contention. I'm trying to win the second half of the season. I'm trying to win the playoffs when that matters. If you feel like that, maybe you can get over the slow September that Godwin maybe starts off with, and then you can have him hopefully at some point this year. He's up to full speed and whatnot. Listen, I mean, overall, the guy was fantastic last year. He's been great throughout his whole career in Tampa. And, if he was 100% healthy, Billy, I mean, I think he's up there, wide receiver 11, 12, 13. He's somewhere in that range. But it's really a gamble. And at 503, it feels a bit early to be throwing out, gambles and reaches like that. Because, I mentioned Hopkins, who's another guy for sure you're going to take a bunch of zeros on. But you can typically get Hopkins at around 9 or 10. So now you're talking about a guy who's, half that. He's going, the top of the fifth. Feels a bit early.
Yeah, I think it's a little early. You look at ADP around that same area. So Godwin at the FFWC is going as pick 54. So just exactly where this question came from. Wide receivers I like in that area more are like Juju Smith-Schuster, Brandon Ayuk this year, even Amari Cooper. I would even say it's safe to say that you could take DeAndre Hopkins there if you really wanted to in a wide receiver 3 start league, not in wide receiver 2 start league. This is 3 start, so that's why a lot of these wide receivers are getting pushed up the board. But we know that Hopkins is only missing 6 games, right? We know he's healthy, where Godwin is going to be limited probably. Then on top of it, they still brought in Gage, they still brought in Julio, they still have Evans. So there's still a lot of, mouths to feed in this offense, and Brady likes to spread the ball around. So I would say it's going to be difficult for Godwin to come in off that ACL injury, and to play full snaps week 1. I know he's ahead of timeline, like you said earlier, Jody. I agree with you. I don't expect him to be running full snaps week 1, 2, 3, maybe even into week 4. And at that point, now you're only 2 weeks behind DeAndre Hopkins, who, in my opinion, is a little bit more of a dominant receiver in this game. And I'd probably lean that way the next round, and just go with a different receiver in this round. Or, you could even grab a running back here, but I would probably lean receiver, but probably look a different angle. I just don't really like taking Godwin this early with a lot of the question marks that he has. Back to rankings. Another receiver that you and I have a pretty big difference on is going to be Hunter Renfrow. So I have him as wide receiver 44. You have him as wide receiver number 38. At the FFWC, he has been going as wide receiver 35, so actually above both of our rankings. Why are you higher on Renfrow?
I think, are we just all forgetting that he was wide receiver 10 last season? Because it feels like, I understand they brought in Davante Adams, but these things aren't making sense to me. Now, I'm lower than most of the people on Derek Carr. A lot of people are putting Derek Carr as a QB1, right up there at QB 12, 13, somewhere in that range. I don't, like me personally, I would never take Carr ahead of Kirk Cousins, but plenty of people are. So I don't understand, if you think that highly of Carr, why is Hunter Renfrow dropping into, that far, 40s? I mean, he, from a volume standpoint, it's not just last year. Look at what he did in 2020 as well. And he's got that end zone rapport already established with Carr. I understand that the whole Fresno State connection and all that, but they have to build that from the ground floor now, whereas he already has that established with Hunter Renfrow. I don't know. I mean, I'm perfectly fine to sit back and just let Hunter Renfrow keep falling into my laps. He doesn't play the same. He doesn't run the same routes that Davante Adams does. He doesn't play the same positions. I don't know. I don't see that his volume is going to just fall off a cliff so much that people should be avoiding him.
See, I don't think it's falling off a cliff, but I do think it's definitely falling down the hill. I don't think we're going to see that 128 target that he saw last year. You look back at the previous years, and he had always been in the 71, 77 targets for 2019, 2020. I don't think he dips that low, but 90 targets is not out of the realm of possibilities. Davante Adams, you add in Waller into the mix. You add in now a RBBC that McDaniels likes to employ with a pass catching back as well. So there's just, to me, there's a lot of question marks with Renfrow, and a lot of his success last year was due to the fact that Waller was out. I mean, had Waller been in, I don't think we see or even talking about Hunter Renfrow inside the top 50 this year. So I have concerns with Hunter Renfrow. I think that a lot of his production, his success came from injury, and I just don't think that Davante Adams is just going to let Renfrow come in and command 100 targets plus this year. So that's where my concerns lie. I definitely like Carr. I do think that college connection is there. I mean, you see in camp right now, they just seem to be on the same page. So, they're taking Ubers together, they're doing lunches together, right? It's the whole new NFL narrative where as long as if you have that receiver and that quarterback having lunch or breakfast or dinner together every day, they're going to be their new best friend. And Davante Adams was always that friend to Carr, and I think that we're going to see that in 2022. So that's why I am lower on Hunter Renfrow. The other one,
it's only 6 spots, so it's not like we're talking 3-4 rounds difference.
No, but mine compared to consensus is a full round, right? Like you're talking 31 or whatever I say it was earlier, 35 to 44. So we're talking about 10 spots nearly. So that's nearly a full round. So definitely worth noting. The next one on the list that we're higher on, and I have to say his name just because I've been pounding the table for this gentleman all offseason, and that's Romeo Dobbs. Romeo comes in as my wide receiver 56, your 62nd. We have him on consensus. Let me find 1 second. I didn't have it up. He's not even on consensus.
He's 55 on consensus.
Okay, so actually within the ballpark now. Um, I loved his tape in college. I remember looking back at when I was doing the video analysis for our YouTube channel, and I was doing those little 1.5 minute videos, and you had a great write up on him too as well at Full Time Fantasy. If anyone hasn't seen it, I highly suggest going over and looking at it. Jody hit a lot of great points on there that still stand true today, but Romeo I just fell in love with his tape, and I remember right after the draft, they drafted Dobbs after Watson. And as soon as he was drafted, I posted Dobbs over Watson. And it's just, you looked at what he had in college and what he was able to do. And now I saw him being tied to Rodgers and being able to bring that big playability. And it's looking like it's stuck through camp. He definitely made impressions. Watson never even hit the field through camp. And I think that Dobbs is going to come out and possibly be that wide receiver 2 for Green Bay. Where do you have him peg in your rankings in terms of the pecking order in Green Bay? And what's your thoughts on Romeo?
I love Dobbs. You mentioned the write-ups and the film. There was a lot of love. It was actually, if you think about it, perfect landing spot because we loved what he did at school, and this is a great landing spot because you're talking about a high octane Green Bay offense that just parted ways with Davante Adams, so you have to love that match. But after those first couple of weeks, he started blowing up because he was making plays in camps. He was the big name for a couple of weeks before Dameon Pierce kind of took his thunder and rumbled over that, but. You always want to approach Green Bay rookie receivers with caution because throughout the whole time Aaron Rodgers is there, there always seems to be like a learning curve. And, Rodgers, he's a little snooty at times, and he's made some typical for him passive-aggressive comments about the receivers. He's also had some positive things to say, but basically he has implied that, these guys need to learn, how to be pros and whatnot. And even look at as great as Davante Adams was, Davante Adams averaged like 7 and 8 fantasy points his first 2 years in the league before he finally was able to establish that long-term trust with Rodgers and to get that rapport built up. So I think as much as I'd like to have plenty of Dobbs, and again, we're not that far apart. It's just a few spots, a couple around, something like that. But maybe I'm approaching it with a little more with caution because, when you have the big names that come across in these summers and all that, people tend to start reaching for them. Like, we're about to see Dameon Pierce. So I'm working on a big sleeper piece right now, and I went ahead and threw Pierce in simply because he's still low. But something tells me in the next couple of days when we get through this weekend, this is a big draft weekend. I think when we get through this draft weekend, you're going to see his ADP jump up at least 2, maybe even 3 rounds. So that'll be interesting. And it's kind of what we saw with Dobbs. He was going undrafted. Early before camp hit because most people were just like, Dynasty, sure, he was getting drafted, but in most leagues he was being ignored. And then he comes in, makes a couple of highlight reel plays, and gets his name on SportsCenter and all that. Then see what happens. Love him as a long-term talent, and it just has yet to be determined where he's going to fit in with Green Bay's offense, where he slides in the pecking order, and how many targets he'll have early on.
The last receiver I want to talk about before we move on to tight ends is going to be Skyy Moore. And Skyy Moore, both of us are a lot lower on consensus on Skyy Moore than the consensus ADP. Consensus over at Fantasy Pros has him as wide receiver 49. You have him as wide receiver 68. I'm even lower as wide receiver 85. That might be a little egregious, but why are you lower on Skyy Moore? I know why I am, and I can get to that in a minute. I mentioned it in the fade list, and I can kind of touch base on those same talking points. But why are you also lower on Skyy Moore?
Well, to me, it comes down to, simply, where's he? We just talked about Dobbs in the pecking order. Well, where is Skyy Moore on the pecking order? Right now he could be as low as 6th. He could be their 4th wide receiver, which means he's going to be clearly behind all 3 of their starting receivers, Mecole Hardman, Juju Smith-Schuster, MVS, and he's going to be behind Travis Kelce, obviously. And then depending on what you think of the backfield, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So right now it's hard for me to say that he's going to – and then, not to mention Isaiah Pacheco. He's coming in. He's making plays. He's kind of looking like a little bit of Tyreek Hill out there with that number 10 jersey on. So it just comes down to where's the volume going to be. I like him overall. I think he's probably got some long-term potential. And, it wouldn't shock me to see him even at some point develop into it probably would surprise me to see him get higher than like their number 3 receiver this season. So why I'm, short version of why I'm a little lower on Moore is just like I said. I mean, right now, cautiously, he's 6th in, the pecking order right now.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. It's exactly what I said on the fade list, is that he's just down the pecking order just based upon the amount of receivers. They went out and signed Juju, a little over $3 million. They went out and signed MVS, about $10 million. They still had Mecole Hardman, who's going to get involved, who was drafted to replace Tyreek Hill after that, off-the-field incident a couple of years ago. You hit the hammer on the nail. The running backs, they're both going to be involved as well. Don't forget Jerick McKinnon and how involved he was down the stretch as well in the passing game, who they re-signed. So all these things are, a bad recipe for success for Skyy Moore. Inside the chat here on YouTube, everybody, I just posted the link to the video that we did on YouTube back in, I think, April for Skyy Moore. And a few things I had noted during that video, even back then, was he's just a little undersized to play, outside at the NFL level. He's only 5'10", 191 pounds. And he never really faced kind of the best competition at the college level. So there's a lot of question marks about his NFL production.
He clicks a lot of the metrics. Like you mentioned in my write-up, he has some impressive metrics. But, yeah, again, level of competition needs to be taken with the asterisk.
Exactly. And so then you look at his involvement in run blocking, and he literally offers nothing to the table here. And watching tape, just never really liked his acceleration after the catch. And how does that translate to the NFL? It's not looking good for success, in my opinion. So I definitely like his dynasty value more than his redraft value this year. I think he's a phenomenal dynasty target, and I think that we're going to see a lot more success from him in 2023 and into 2024. But 2022 is not the year, in my opinion, to be drafting Skyy Moore. Let's move on to tight ends. We got about just under 20 minutes left, and we don't have a lot of differences in our tight end rankings, which is very comforting, because you hammered accuracy on tight ends last year, if I recall. The only major difference, so let's just start at the top. You have Kelsey at 1. I have Kelsey at 2. We both have Pitts at 3. We have 4 and 5 swap between Waller and Kittle. We both have Schultz at 6. I have Hawkinson at 7. You have Hawkinson at 8. Goddard is at 8 for me, 9 for you. Ertz is the only major difference in the top 10, 3 spot differences. I'm at number 10. You're at 7. Can you let me know why you're higher on Ertz?
Just what I saw in that offense last year, once he went to Arizona. Just look at weeks 15 through 18, 11, 13, 9, and 10 targets. And now you're talking DeAndre Hopkins going to be out for 6 weeks. So to me, it's just a volume play. Ertz was the tight end 5 last year. He's in a great offense. He's with a really, really good quarterback. And the targets are going to be there, especially in the early part of the year. And, I love my boy Rondale Moore too. But I think, in a small degree, that him and Ertz are going to be kind of, competing for those same type of short targets. But Ertz, last year he was, he's making some plays down the field and all that once Kyler Murray, kind of established that rapport with him. So I'm excited to see how the season's going to open for him, because you could argue, in my opinion, that I don't think it would be terrible at all. You could even argue that Ertz could move up there ahead of Dalton Schultz and be right there behind the tier of number 1 quarterback. So he's a guy I've been scooping up, pretty much everywhere. But to me, tight end rankings are they're pretty much in check, like you said. There's not a lot of differentiation, and around the industry, we all have the same 5 guys, maybe in a different order. The same 4 or 5 guys are, there at the top. And then to me, tight end is relatively deep in the sense of, to me, there's not a lot of difference between those guys that are pretty much all going in the latter parts of most rounds. The guys from range of after Cole Kmet and Freiermuth. There's this range of tight ends from like 13, and you could argue that number now with Bellinger now gets into like 25 deep. And if you like, you're seeing Brevin Jordan here in Houston picking up steam. So tight ends deep. There's no reason to really reach at this point. I just feel like Ertz to me is a guy who I think is going to contend for top 5 tight end numbers, but in a good day, if in a lucky day, you can get him sometimes as tight end 9 or tight end 10. So I just love that value.
Yeah, it's amazing how close these tight end rankings are when you look at the projections, the numbers. Like in my rankings, tight end number 12 through tight end number 20 is a difference of 2.2 fantasy points. All within that, it's like half a fantasy point here, a third of a fantasy point here, and it's like that just shows you that it can be any one of those guys at the end of the year who's going to finish at 12th or 19th or 21st or whatever it may be. I like Ertz a lot for the same reasons that you like him, or also the reasons why I'm just a little bit lower. Is that I think he has a phenomenal first half of the season. Like I would argue that he's probably going to be a top 4 tight end in the first 6 weeks. Like it would not surprise me if you look up and see his name, with the same fantasy points or maybe something similar of Mark Andrews or Kyle Pitts, even because of the amount of targets that he's going to see in the first 6 weeks. But then when Hopkins gets back, now you have Hopkins on the field, Rondale Moore on the field. You still have, running backs. There's Marquise Brown. There's so many more mouths to feed, and this ball's going to be spread around. Plus, Kyle likes to run the ball. So that's the reason why I'm just slightly lower on him. Again, nothing egregious. I'm at 10, you're at 7, but just the rationale behind the thought process. Again, we're the next one. Cole Kmet, 9 and 10. Pat Freiermuth are both at 11. Jasecki, 15, 13. Irv Smith, 12, 14. Albert O, 13, 12. Noah Fant, both at 16. This is the only major difference we have inside the top 20. Dawson Knox at 20 and you at 15. So I feel like I need to explain myself on this one. Again, he hits the fade list, so there's a pattern here. Most people I'm lower on are on this fade list. And it breaks down to just his touchdown rate. It was unsustainable, in my opinion, again, for 2022. 18.4% touchdown rate. He only saw 13% of the target share last year, 13.2 to be exact, which was tight in 22. He only saw 71 targets last year, which was tight in 20. If you take away 3 of those measly touchdowns last year, he finishes as tight end number 16. So I think it's going to be very hard for him to repeat those numbers. Regression is definitely due. I remember looking back at some of these games, and it was like Dawson Knox went 3 targets, 2 catches, and 2 of them were touchdowns. Like those games are not going to happen again. If they do, it's going to be one-offs versus every other 3-4 weeks. So I do have concerns with Dawson Knox. Again, he is, though, tied to the best offense in football. So that's always in the back of my head. But I'm going to try to make him beat me here in fantasy this year. Any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, it's all fair. Like I said, these guys between 12 and like even going as far as 25, you can interchange them a lot. I think maybe I felt kind of like, this poor guy. I originally actually, until I updated him recently, I had him down around 19 or 20. So we're actually closer than we're thinking. I did a recent update. And I thought, well, maybe his touchdowns don't fall off all that much. Maybe it just feels. Maybe I just felt dirty, like for disrespecting so much, because he was he was top 10 last year. For us to just be like, everyone out there saying the same thing. Touchdown regression, and of course that is probably going to happen. But maybe he is able to maintain enough of a role where he can still score 5 or 6, and with touchdown being at such premium for tight end, if he can still stay around that range, like you mentioned, if you cut out 3, he drops a little bit, but he still stayed around that wide receiver 16 range, what you said. So, and that's about where I have him now. But again, give us some more updates, which we're doing pretty much daily here at Full Time Fantasy, and he'll probably slide down a little bit.
All right. Before we finish the show, give me one tight end who is outside the top, let's say 20. Let's say outside the top 20 that you would not be surprised if he finished as tight end 15 or better.
If we're talking about the outside of the top 20 for like ECR, we're going to go boy. Hurt.
Yep.
He's stepping right into that the role that CJ Uzama actually put to pretty good use last year. I think he's gonna be in position to look at 75, 80 targets, and if you look at Hurst in I want to say it was 2020 when he was the starter for Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. If you look at his finish that season in fantasy, I want to say he was a top 10 tight end for the Falcons, and I think he's perfectly capable of approaching those numbers again in a much better offense with a better quarterback and a much better supporting cast that are going to command all those targets and leave things for him with the lesser coverages and all that. I love Hurst as a value. I still have him like conservatively ranked around wide receiver 18 or 19. But to me, if you're looking for guys that are, again, I never take tight ends early because I never like how my rosters end up shaping up when I do. So these are the kind of guys that I'm looking to focus on. These guys that are available in the late, maybe even the final rounds of drafts that I think can give me, very good fantasy numbers and even contend for a tight end one.
Yeah, I like the upside. I think for me, Hurst's more of a best ball target than redraft, but I can definitely see the allure of him and the upside that he has inside the offense. For me, mine's a little bit more, I guess I want to call it vanilla, but it's going to be, I really, really like Austin Hooper this year. And I think that he was misused in the Browns. If you look back prior to him signing with the Browns when he was in Atlanta in 2018, he had, number 8 tight end in fantasy points per game. 2019, he was number 3 tight end in fantasy points per game. We saw him with, 97 targets that 1 year, 88 targets the next year, both in the 70 range of receptions. So I think we're going to see a similar usage here in Tennessee for him. He's definitely a step up from the tight end situation they've had last year. And I don't think they're going to want to, give the big dog over 300 plus carries again this year. I think they're going to be a little bit more conservative with his touches. You look at the wide receiver core, and Burke continues to, struggle in the offense, or so we hear. Kyle Phillips is flashing, but you also have Bob Woods, who's, coming off knee injury. So there's a lot of opportunity for target share in this offense. And we go back to, vacated targets, and they're the second most offense in the NFL with the vacated targets. So Austin Hooper, for me, as long as they can, utilize him as the same way that Atlanta did, I think that it's well in the cards for him to surprise the rankings and beat out the ADP that he's been currently going at. So consensus has him as tight end 23. FFWC has been drafted as pick 199 or tight end 20 on the dot off the board. So Austin Hooper is my tight end sleeper for rounds 20 or pick 20 or later in the tight end position. I think we got a few people in the chat. If you have any questions, why don't you throw them in there? We'd love to answer some questions before we wrap up the show. We appreciate.
I disagree with you on Hooper either. I like him a lot too. Again, tight end. It's just a wait and take approach because you can get these kind of guys like you just said. They pick 199, the final round of all that. I feel perfectly comfortable taking these guys that late. I'd rather load up on running back and wide receiver depth than to get these guys later because I feel like, even if I had to roster 2 tight ends, if I have 20-plus roster spots, 2 of these guys, I'd rather do that than to, spend the capital on one of the top 5 running back, one of the top 5 tight ends in rounds 3 or 4 or 5.
Well, that's the thing, especially.
I never like how my rosters do. Every time I've been like, well, I'm going to go ahead and take Kyle Pitts. I mean, and I love Kyle Pitts, but every time he's there in the top of the 4th or the bottom of the 3rd, I'm like, well, what the hell? I'm going to take it. I just never I always feel like my roster has a big hole in it.
So Mr. Grapefruit likes Tyler Conklin with his grilled cheese burritos. I think Conklin's a sneaky play as well. It looks like he's beating out CJ Uzoma in the pass catching role as a tight end in the Jets as well. And as I think,
big
especially
with too, I believe I read that about him.
Yeah. So that's that. I think it's Yamato Forever says that he likes Kmet this year. I do too. He's definitely inside the top 20 though. But we love Kmet here on the show. He's been my most owned tight end in best ball as well as redraft this year. I think
we'd be so down on the Bears, but so much love for Cole Kmet and Darnell Mooney. But that is what it is.
Because they're the only targets. They're the only 2.
Exactly.
Well, everybody, if there's no questions, then we want to thank you for tuning in tonight. Thanks for joining us on the wide receiver and tight end ranking show. We're going to try to throw in a running backs and quarterbacks next year before the last weekend as we hop in drafts. So we'll look to do that next week here. We'll throw the dates out on Twitter as I've been very, very busy between drafts. I've got about 2 drafts a day between now and September 10th. So we will squeeze in another show between now and then to get our last bit of our rankings up for people to see. If you have not done so, head on over to Full Time Fantasy. Check out all the new articles we posted. I post my fade list, and there's also our the rankings are up there for review, as well as a draft tiered cheat sheet. And then Scott says tonight they're going to be releasing the consensus rankings for the site. So that is my rankings, Jody's rankings, and Scott rankings all side by side. So you can see all 3 of us and how we stack up. Yeah, it's a great way of looking at, all 3 of us at the site and who we have and who everyone's higher on, lower on, and kind of who's all in the same box, right? So if we all have, I think there's a couple players like we all have is like, wide receiver like 20, and this is just me like using it as an example, like all wide receiver 36 across the board. Like it's nice seeing that as a ranker when your other peers are thinking the same thing. So Jody, thanks for talking rankings with me tonight. I enjoyed our ranking summit this morning. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you all back here next week.